After 27 years in prison, she returns home, but fate changes everything. Margaret Turner walked along the dirt road with a small suitcase in her hand, feeling her heart race with each step that brought her closer to the rusty gate. After 27 long years behind bars, she was finally free, but the freedom she had dreamed of so much seemed different than she had imagined. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, and that's when she saw the house where she grew up. It was no longer the prosperous property of her memories. The windows were cracked, the roof had holes, and the garden she had once tended with so much love was overgrown with weeds. But what shocked her most was the middle-aged woman who appeared on the porch, watching her with eyes full of tears and something she recognized as anger. "Mother," the woman whispered, and Margaret felt her legs tremble. It was Jennifer, her daughter, who was only 18 when she was imprisoned. Now she was there at 45, with hair already graying and wrinkles around her eyes that spoke of years of suffering. "Hi, my daughter," Margaret tried to smile, extending her arms for a hug that didn't come. Jennifer descended the steps slowly, as if each step were painful. "I thought I'd never see you again," she said, but there was no joy in her voice, only a deep sadness that cut through Margaret's heart. "I thought that many times too." Margaret let her arms fall to her sides. "How are you, daughter?" "How am I?" Jennifer laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "You abandoned me 27 years ago, Mother. How do you think I am?" The words fell like stones between them. Margaret knew it would be difficult, but she didn't expect it to hurt so much. "I didn't abandon you, Jennifer. I was imprisoned. It's different." "Is it?" Her daughter crossed her arms. "Because for me, the result was the same. You disappeared from my life when I needed you most." A young man appeared in the doorway, watching the scene with curiosity and distrust. Margaret immediately noticed he had something of Jennifer's features, but also something she couldn't identify. "Mom, who is it?" the young man asked, walking to stand beside Jennifer. Margaret felt the world spin. "Mom?" That young man had called Jennifer Mom, which meant, "This is Christopher, my son," Jennifer said, placing a protective hand on the young man's shoulder. "Christopher, this is your grandmother, Margaret." Grandmother. She was a grandmother and didn't even know it. Margaret looked at the grandson she had never known, a man of about 25, who stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. How many things had she missed? How many important moments had passed without her? "Nice to meet you," Christopher said politely, but without warmth in his voice. "The pleasure is mine," Margaret murmured, still processing the reality. I didn't even know you existed." "Yeah, well," Jennifer sighed, "a lot happened while you were away." The silence that followed was too heavy. Margaret looked around, noticing there were no more cars in the garage, that the plants were dry, that everything seemed abandoned. "And your father?" she asked, afraid of the answer. Jennifer closed her eyes and took a deep breath before answering. "Daddy passed away 10 years ago, Mother." Margaret felt her legs give way and had to lean on the gate. 10 years. Richard was gone 10 years ago and she didn't even know. How did it happen? "He had a heart attack. He was alone," Jennifer said, and there was accusation in her voice. "Alone, Mother, calling your name until the end." The words hit Margaret like a punch to the stomach. She doubled over, holding the suitcase so tightly her fingers turned white. "I didn't know. No one told me." "And how would they tell you? You didn't receive visits. You didn't want to know about us." "I couldn't receive visits," Margaret exploded. "I was imprisoned, Jennifer. It wasn't my choice." "Wasn't it?" Her daughter laughed again, that cruel laugh that hurt more than a shout. "Then explain to me how you stole the company from our own family. Explain how you chose money over us." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, "I didn't steal anything." Tears now streamed freely down Margaret's face. I would never do that to you." "Of course not." Jennifer shook her head, incredulous. "That's why you were convicted, right? That's why you spent 27 years in prison for innocence." Christopher, who had been observing the argument in silence, finally spoke. "Mom, maybe we should continue this conversation inside. The neighbors are watching." Jennifer looked around and noticed there were some people in the windows of nearby houses watching the scene. She sighed heavily. "Fine. Come in," she said to Margaret. But it wasn't a warm invitation. It was just resignation. Margaret followed her daughter and grandson into the house where she had grown up. The interior was even worse than the exterior. The once elegant living room now had old, worn-out furniture, walls with water stains, and a musty smell that invaded the nostrils. None of the old decorations, the family portraits, the items that told the story of the Turner family remained. "Sit there." Jennifer pointed to a faded sofa. "Do you want some water?" "Please." Margaret sat down carefully, as if she could be thrown out at any moment. Christopher brought a glass of water, and she thanked him with a nod. The young man was handsome, had the family's dark eyes, but there was something about him that intrigued her. Perhaps it was the way he looked at her, as if he were trying to decide if she deserved forgiveness or condemnation. "Mom told me you worked at our great-grandfather's company," Christopher said, sitting in a nearby chair, "and that you, well, that you did some things you shouldn't have." "I did nothing," Margaret repeated, but she knew her word alone meant nothing to them. "I know it's hard to believe after all these years, but I swear on your grandfather's soul that I am innocent." "Don't swear on my father's soul," Jennifer said sharply. "You don't have that right, not after everything he suffered because of you." "Jennifer, please." "Please what?" Her daughter stood up abruptly. "Please believe you. Please pretend the last 27 years didn't happen. Please pretend that Daddy didn't sell everything we had to pay for your lawyer and then was left in poverty." Margaret didn't know about these things. In prison, she never knew the details of how the family had dealt with her absence and the consequences of the scandal. Each revelation was like a new stab wound. "He sold the company?" "Sold everything, Mom. The company, the cars, Grandma's jewelry. He almost sold this house too. Everything to try to help you. And in the end it was all for nothing. You were convicted anyway, and he was left with nothing." Christopher watched his grandmother with an expression mixing pity and curiosity. He had never known the full story, only the fragments his mother had told over the years when she was especially sad or angry. "Grandpa never recovered financially?" he asked. "Never," Jennifer answered. "He died in this old falling-apart house, working until his last day as a salesman in an auto parts store to pay the bills. The man who once owned the biggest construction company in the region died poor, Christopher. Poor and alone." Margaret shrank into the sofa. Guilt was a physical weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Even though she was innocent, she felt responsible for all the suffering her imprisonment had caused the family. Did he talk about me?" "He did," Jennifer said, but her voice softened for a moment. "He talked about you until the end. Sometimes I would get angry with him, because even after everything, he still loved you. He still believed you would come back." "Did he believe in my innocence?" Jennifer hesitated before answering. It was Christopher who spoke. "Grandpa never let anyone speak ill of you in front of him. He said he knew you better than anyone, and that something was wrong with the whole story." Margaret closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely. Richard had believed in her until the end, even when her own daughter didn't. "Where is he buried?" "At St. Andrew's Cemetery," Jennifer answered. "Every Sunday I take flowers to him." Can I go with you next Sunday?" "I don't know if that's a good idea," Jennifer shook her head. "I need time to process all this, Mom. Your return... I didn't expect it to be so hard." "I understand." Margaret tried to smile through the tears. "Where will I stay? Is there a hotel in town?" Christopher and Jennifer exchanged looks. The town was small and had no hotels. The only place to stay was an old, run-down boarding house on the outskirts. "You can stay in the back room," Christopher said, ignoring his mother's disapproving look. "It's small, but it has a bed and a closet." "Christopher, I don't know if..." "Mom, she has nowhere to go, and as upset as we are with her, she's still family." Jennifer sighed heavily, clearly torn between years of anger and the upbringing that taught her to always help those in need. Fine. But it's temporary, until you figure out what you're going to do with your life. Thank you, Margaret said, genuinely grateful. I promise I won't get in your way. And if you need anything, help with anything. We don't need your help, Jennifer cut in. We learned to manage on our own a long time ago. Dinner was a painful experience. Christopher had prepared a simple pasta with tomato sauce, and the three ate in near total silence. Margaret watched her grandson, noticing how tired he seemed for his age. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hands had the calluses of someone who does hard work. What do you do for work, Christopher? I have 3 jobs, he answered without looking up from his plate. In the morning I work at a mechanic's shop, in the afternoon at a hardware store, and at night I deliver pizza. Margaret was shocked. 3 jobs for a 25-year-old seemed excessive. 3 jobs? Why? Because someone has to keep this house going, he said, and there was a hint of resentment in his voice. My mother works as a seamstress, but she doesn't earn much. The bills keep coming. Christopher, Jennifer tried to interrupt, but he continued. Do you know how much it costs to maintain a house this old? The plumbing keeps breaking, the electrical wiring is from my great-grandfather's time, the roof leaks, and the property tax we're still paying because Grandpa fell behind when he passed. Margaret understood the implied message. Richard had left debts behind because he spent everything trying to save her. Another guilt to carry. I didn't know. Yeah, right, there's a lot you don't know. Christopher pushed his plate away, clearly losing his appetite. Sorry, Mom, I'm not hungry. He got up and left the kitchen, leaving the 2 women alone. Jennifer sighed once more. He's not normally like this. He's a good boy. It's just, life hasn't been easy for him. He seems very responsible for his age. He had to grow up fast, Jennifer began, clearing the plates. When his father abandoned us— His father? Margaret interrupted. Who is Christopher's father? Jennifer stopped clearing the plates and looked at her mother with an expression that mixed sadness and anger. That's right, isn't it? You know nothing about my life. You don't know I got married. You don't know I got divorced. You don't know Christopher grew up without a father because I chose poorly. Each word was an accusation. Margaret realized her absence had left deeper wounds than she imagined. Tell me, she said softly. Tell me about your life. Jennifer hesitated, clearly torn between the desire to share and the anger she felt. Finally, she sat back down at the table. I got married at 22 to a man named Stephen. He seemed perfect at the time. He worked at an accounting firm, was polite, said he loved me. I thought I had finally found the stability I lost when everything fell apart. What happened? Christopher was born, and Stephen changed completely. He said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he was too young, that he wanted to enjoy life. When Christopher turned 2, he just disappeared. He left a note saying he was going to try his luck in New York and never came back. Margaret closed her eyes, picturing her young daughter alone with a small child without a mother to help her. And did Dad help? Dad did what he could, but he was trying to recover financially himself. Besides, he was always sad, always waiting for you to come back. Sometimes I felt like he looked at me and saw you, as if I were a constant reminder of what he had lost. Jennifer's words painted a picture of family suffering that Margaret had never fully imagined. In prison, she had created an idealized version of how the family was coping with her absence. The reality was much harsher and more painful. I'm sorry, my daughter. I'm sorry I wasn't here when you needed me. I'm sorry too, Jennifer said, but it wasn't forgiveness. It was just an acknowledgement of mutual loss. That night, Margaret lay in the narrow bed in the back room, looking at the water-stained ceiling. The room was small and simple, with a window overlooking the backyard, where she had once planted rose bushes that were now dead. Everything was dead. The plants, the dreams, the relationships. She could hear low voices coming from the kitchen. Christopher and Jennifer were talking, probably about her. Every now and then she caught a word or two. Difficult. Complicated. I don't know. She understood. Her arrival had destabilized the fragile balance the two of them had built over the years. The next day, Margaret woke up early and found Christopher making coffee in the kitchen. He was wearing a mechanic's uniform, and looked like he had just showered. "Good morning," she said softly, so as not to startle him. "Good morning," he replied, but without looking at her. "There's coffee in the thermos." "Thank you." Margaret poured herself a cup and sat at the table. "Are you going to work now?" "Yeah. The shop opens at 7. "And your mother?" "She works from home. She has a sewing studio in the front room." Margaret nodded, processing the information. Christopher seemed more willing to talk when he was alone, away from the tension her presence created with Jennifer. "Christopher, can I ask you something?" He hesitated, but gave an affirmative gesture. "Do you believe I'm guilty of what happened?" The young man stopped stirring his coffee and looked at her for the first time since she arrived. His eyes were just like Richard's, dark and expressive. "I don't know," he said honestly. "My mother always told me you did wrong things, that you caused a lot of suffering for the family. But Grandpa always spoke differently." "How so?" "He said you were a good person, that you would never consciously harm the family. Sometimes when he thought I wasn't listening, he would talk to himself, ask the air how you were, if you were okay in prison." Margaret felt her heart tighten. Richard had never given up on her. "And what do you think about that?" Christopher finished his coffee and picked up an old backpack from the floor. "I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. But honestly, Grandma, I'm more worried about paying this month's bills than solving problems from the past." After Christopher left for work, Margaret was alone in the kitchen for a few minutes before Jennifer appeared, already dressed for work, with an apron full of pins. "Good morning," Jennifer said curtly. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" "I slept." The reply was sharp, leaving no opening for conversation. Jennifer served herself coffee and bread, eating in silence. Margaret watched her daughter, noticing the greying hair, the worry lines around her eyes, the calloused hands from so much work. Jennifer had aged a lot for her age. "Jennifer, I wanted to help in some way. I can't just stay here doing nothing while you all work so hard." "You can help by getting out of my life once again," Jennifer replied, without looking up from her plate. "Dear, please." "Please what?" Jennifer finally looked at her. "You think you can show up here after 27 years and pretend we're a happy family? You think I'll forget everything I went through, all the nights I cried, all the times I needed a mother and you weren't here? I wasn't here because I was in prison. And you were in prison because you did wrong things. I didn't." Margaret slammed her hand on the table, making the cups rattle. "I didn't do anything wrong, Jennifer. I was the victim of a setup." "Oh, now it's a setup." Jennifer laughed in that bitter way that was becoming familiar. "How convenient, huh, Mom? 27 years later you discover it was all a setup." "It wasn't discovered now. I always knew I was innocent. But who would believe me? The evidence was all against me. The witnesses spoke against me. I had no way to prove my innocence." "And now you do?" Margaret hesitated. That was the question that had tormented her for years. In prison, she had studied her own case obsessively, rereading every document, every testimony, trying to find inconsistencies. There were clues, suspicions, but nothing concrete. "I have some ideas," she said carefully. "Some suspicions about who might have framed me." "Suspicions aren't proof, Mom." Jennifer stood up, ending the conversation. "And even if they were, what would that change? Dad isn't coming back. The lost years aren't coming back. Nothing is coming back." Jennifer left the kitchen, leaving Margaret alone with her thoughts. She knew her daughter was partly right. Even if she could prove her innocence, it wouldn't undo the suffering her absence had caused. But perhaps it could start to heal the wounds, to rebuild the relationships that were broken. Margaret decided to explore the house. Each room told a story of decline. What was once a comfortable mansion now seemed like a house haunted by bad memories. In the room that was once hers and Richard's, Jennifer now slept. The bed was the same, but the sheets were different, simpler. The lace curtains she had chosen so carefully were gone, as were the family pictures that decorated the walls. In the living room, where the family used to gather to watch television, there were now only old furniture and a small tube TV. The shelves that once displayed Richard's trophies and family photos were empty, except for a few worn books and a framed photo of Christopher at his high school graduation. The office that was once the command center of Turner and Associates was completely empty. Only marks on the wall showed where the mahogany desk, the important files, the diplomas and certifications once were. Margaret remembered all the hours she had spent in that office, helping Richard with the accounting, organizing documents, answering the phone. It was there that everything had begun to fall apart. That's when she heard the doorbell ringing. She hesitated for a moment. Should she answer it? Jennifer was working in the front room and probably couldn't stop. Margaret went to the door. On the other side was an elderly woman, thin, with white hair tied in a bun and curious eyes. She carried a tray covered with a dish towel. "You must be Margaret," the woman said without preamble. "I'm Mrs. Dorothy. I live in the blue house next door." "Nice to meet you," Margaret replied, a little surprised by the direct approach. "I brought a pudding for you. I imagine it must be hard to readjust after being away for so long." Margaret accepted the tray, touched by the kind gesture. "Would you like to come in? I can make some coffee." "Yes, I'd like that, Mrs." Dorothy entered without ceremony, looking around as if she were assessing the changes in the house. "This house used to be the prettiest on the street, you know. When your Richard was alive, he took care of every detail." "You knew my husband?" "Knew him? Dear, I've lived next door for 40 years. I saw you arrive as a bride. I saw Jennifer grow up. I saw everything that happened when you left." Margaret made coffee while processing her neighbor's words. It was strange to hear someone talk about her life as if it were a story everyone knew. "You knew I came back?" "Well, the whole neighborhood knows. News like that spreads fast in a small town." Mrs. Dorothy sat at the kitchen table. "But I wanted to talk to you personally." "Why?" "Because there are things you need to know, things that Jennifer might not tell you." Margaret felt her heart speed up. She served coffee for both of them and sat down, waiting. "Your Richard never stopped going to visit you in prison," Mrs. Dorothy said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Every Sunday he left early and only came back at night. Jennifer thought he went to church, but I knew the truth." "How did you know?" "Because one Sunday I followed him," the woman admitted without shame. "I was worried about him. A man his age going out alone every Sunday, always coming back sad. I thought he might be sick and not wanting to worry the family." Margaret could barely breathe. Richard went to visit her, but she had never received a single visit. For 27 years she had thought she had been completely forgotten by her family. "That can't be right," she murmured. "I never received a visit from him." "Well," Mrs. Dorothy took a sip of coffee. "I thought it was strange too, so I decided to ask him myself. It was one afternoon when he was in the backyard, trying to fix the roof by himself, poor thing. I offered to help and we ended up talking. And what did he say? He said he went to visit you every Sunday, but that you refused to see him. He said you had asked him not to come back anymore, that you were too ashamed of what you had done." Margaret stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. "That's a lie. I never refused his visit. I never asked him not to come anymore." "Calm down, dear," Mrs. Dorothy said, but her eyes shone with interest. "I knew there was something wrong with that story." "You knew?" "Well, I knew you for 15 years before all this happened. You were never one to refuse family, and more, your Richard deposited money into your account every month. He showed me the receipts once, proud because he was managing to help you even from afar." Margaret leaned on the sink, feeling dizzy. Richard deposited money for her, but she had never received a cent. In prison, she only had access to the money she earned from internal jobs, which was very little. "How much money?" "It wasn't much, poor thing didn't have it, but every month he deposited about $200. He said it was for you to buy things at the commissary so you wouldn't go without." $200 a month for 27 years. Margaret did the math in her head. It was more than $60,000 that should have been in her account and that she had never seen. Where had that money gone? "Mrs. Dorothy, are you sure about this?" "Yes, I am. In fact, he kept the receipts in a shoebox in the closet. After he died, Jennifer must have thrown them away. But maybe something is still saved somewhere." Margaret needed to sit down. Her head was spinning with all this information. Richard had tried to visit her, had deposited money for her, but someone had intercepted everything. Someone had done it on purpose so that she would feel abandoned by her family. Did you tell Jennifer about this?" "I tried, but she didn't want to hear it. She said they were the delusions of a lonely old man. Jennifer was very upset after you were arrested, you know. She couldn't understand how the mother she admired so much had done something like that. Because I didn't, Margaret said firmly. I didn't do any of what they accused me of. Mrs. Dorothy studied Margaret's face for a long moment. I always thought there was something strange about that whole story. The company was doing well. You didn't need money. Why would you risk everything? I wouldn't risk it. I would never do that to my family. Then who did it? That was the million-dollar question. Margaret had her suspicions, but suspicions weren't proof. During the years in prison, she had gone over every detail of the case thousands of times. There were inconsistencies in the testimonies, documents that seemed forged, witnesses who changed their stories, but all of that had been ignored during the trial. I have some ideas, she said carefully. But I would need to investigate to find proof. Well, if you want my opinion, Mrs. Dorothy lowered her voice as if telling a secret, I always suspected that accountant you had, Brandon. Margaret froze. Brandon Mitchell had been the company's accountant for 10 years before the scandal. He had been one of the key witnesses against her at the trial, claiming she had coerced him into signing false documents. His betrayal had been one of the things that hurt the most during the process. Why did you suspect him? Oh, I don't know. I always thought he was fake. One of those who speaks sweetly to your face but is capable of anything behind your back. And after you were arrested, he vanished from town. No one saw or heard from him again. Vanished from town? Brandon had disappeared after the trial. Margaret didn't know that. In prison, she had lost contact with everything happening in the outside world. Do you know where he went? I have no idea. But I know he sold his house very quickly and left. They said he bought a farm in Arkansas, but it might be a rumor. A farm in Arkansas. With what money would a small-town accountant buy a farm? Margaret felt she was starting to connect dots she hadn't been able to connect before. Mrs. Dorothy, can I ask you a favor? Of course, dear. What do you need? Could you not mention this conversation to Jennifer for now? I need time to process all this and to decide what to do. Don't worry, but can I give you some advice? Margaret nodded. Don't give up on your family. Jennifer is hurt, but deep down she still loves you. And Christopher is a good boy. He just needs to understand that not everything is as it seems. After Mrs. Dorothy left, Margaret was alone in the kitchen, processing all the information she had received. Richard had tried to visit her, had deposited money for her, had never given up on her. Someone had intercepted everything, ensuring she felt abandoned. And Brandon, the accountant who had betrayed her, had disappeared right after the trial with enough money to buy a farm. For the first time in 27 years, Margaret felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was still a chance to prove her innocence. Maybe there was still time to get her family back. But first she needed more information. And she knew exactly where to begin. When Christopher arrived from work that afternoon, he found Margaret in the kitchen preparing dinner. She had found some simple ingredients in the refrigerator and made a chicken stir-fry with rice. Hi, he said, looking surprised to find her cooking. Hi, my dear. How was work? Tiring. He sat at the table, clearly exhausted. Smells good. Thank you, I hope you like it. Christopher watched his grandmother for a moment. There was something different about her today, an energy that wasn't there the night before. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course. In prison, and did you study anything? Margaret smiled. It was the first personal question her grandson had asked her. Yes, I did. I finished high school, took a technical course in accounting, and another in law. I used the time to prepare for when I got out. Prepare how? Well, I always knew that one day I would get out, and that I would need to prove my innocence. So I studied everything I could about laws, about investigation, about how documents can be forged. Christopher looked interested for the first time since she had arrived. And did you find out anything? Some inconsistencies, but nothing I could use at the time. Now maybe it's different. How so? Margaret hesitated. Should she tell her grandson about her conversation with Mrs. Dorothy? It would be unfair to involve him in her plans before she was sure of anything. It's complicated, my dear. But I'm starting to understand some things that didn't make sense before. Jennifer arrived at that moment, looking surprised to find the table set and food prepared. "You cooked?" she asked, as if the idea were absurd. "I cooked. I hope you like it." Jennifer sat at the table hesitantly, as if expecting some kind of trick. Dinner proceeded in silence, but Margaret noticed that both Christopher and Jennifer ate everything, even had seconds. "It was good," Christopher said when he finished. "Thank you." "You're welcome, dear." Jennifer said nothing, but Margaret saw that she cleaned her plate completely. It was a small step forward. After dinner, while washing the dishes, Margaret heard Christopher and Jennifer talking in the living room. She couldn't make out all the words, but the tone was softer than in previous conversations. That night, before sleeping, Margaret made a mental list of everything she needed to investigate. First, she wanted to see the documents from her case, if they still existed. Second, she needed to find a way to track down Brandon Mitchell. Third, she wanted to understand how her visits and deposits had been intercepted. But most importantly, she needed to do this without alienating her family further. One step at a time. The next day, Margaret woke up determined. After Christopher left for work and Jennifer locked herself in the studio, she decided to take a walk through the town. She wanted to see what had changed, who was still around, what information she might find. The town seemed smaller than she remembered. Many shops had closed, others were different. The office of the old company, Turner and Associates, was now a cheap clothing store. The bank where she always made the company deposits was still there, but with a different name. Margaret entered the bank, hoping to find someone who knew her from the old days. The manager was new, but there was an older teller she recognized. "Mr. Harold," she approached the teller. The man looked up and took a moment to recognize her. When he did, his expression became cautious. "Margaret, you're back." "Yes, I'm back. How are you?" "Fine, fine." He looked around nervously. "I heard that you got out." "I served my sentence," she said simply. "Mr. Harold, can I ask you a question? Do you remember my checking account, the one I had back in the company days?" "I remember it more or less." "Why? Did anyone make deposits into it after I was arrested?" Harold hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "Look, Margaret, that's information I can't just give out. You'd have to speak with management, present documents." "I understand, but do you remember if there was any activity in the account?" "Yes, there was. Regular deposits. But then they stopped." "When did they stop?" "About 10 years ago, more or less." 10 years? Exactly when Richard died. That confirmed he really was making the deposits. But why did she never have access to the money? And withdrawals? Were there withdrawals from the account? Harold looked around once more before answering in a low voice. "There were, always for the same amount as the deposits, as if someone deposited and another person withdrew." Margaret felt her blood boil. Someone was stealing the money Richard deposited for her. Someone had access to her account and took out everything her husband sent. "Mr. Harold, do you have any idea who made the withdrawals?" "I can't say that, Margaret. It would be a serious violation." "But—" He hesitated. "If you really want to know, you'll have to look for the official documentation." Margaret thanked him and left the bank with more questions than answers. She needed professional help to investigate these matters, but who could help her in a small town where everyone had already judged and condemned her? That's when she remembered something Richard always used to say: "When you need information in a small town, find the person who knows everybody." And she knew exactly who to look for. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Margaret headed to the town's notary office. If there was anyone who knew all the business that went on in the region, it was the notary. Mrs. Patricia had worked there for over 30 years and had recorded practically all the town's important contracts. Margaret Turner. Mrs. Patricia looked over her glasses when she entered. "My dear, it's been so long." "Hi, Mrs. Patricia. How are you?" "Well, thank God. And you? I heard you came back home." "That's true. I'm trying to readjust." Mrs. Patricia gestured for her to sit in a chair beside the desk. "It must be difficult indeed. Your daughter went through very hard times after what happened." "I know. Mrs. Patricia, Can I ask you a favor? Of course, dear. What do you need? Do you remember Brandon Mitchell, the accountant who worked for our company? Yes, I remember. Clever young man, always very well dressed. Do you know what happened to him after my trial? Mrs. Patricia took off her glasses and cleaned them thoughtfully. Well, it was a strange thing. Right after your case ended, he showed up here wanting to register the sale of his house. Everything very fast, very rushed. Said he had gotten a better job in another city. And you believed it? At the time, yes. But later, when I found out he had bought land in Arkansas, I started to think it was strange. Where would an accountant get the money to buy a farm? A farm in Arkansas? Are you sure? Yes, I am. In fact, I registered the power of attorney he left to sell some plots he had here. He cited the property in Arkansas as justification for the hurry. Margaret felt her heart race. She was finally finding concrete clues. Mrs. Patricia, do you remember in what city that property was? Let me see, Mrs. Patricia went to an old file cabinet and flipped through some folders. Here it is, Hot Springs, a cattle ranch on the outskirts of Hot Springs. Hot Springs. Margaret memorized the name. Now she had a starting point to find Brandon. Did you keep a copy of those documents? Yes, I did, but I can't just give them to you without authorization. They're official documents. I understand. But if I could get legal authorization, would you help me? If everything were within the law, of course. Margaret left the notary's office with a sense of progress. She was assembling a puzzle that had been scattered for 27 years, but she still needed professional help. That's when she remembered Attorney Stephen, a young lawyer who had tried to help during her trial, but hadn't had sufficient resources for a proper defense. Perhaps he was still in town. Attorney Stephen's office was small and modest, on a side street downtown. When Margaret entered, she found an older man with graying hair but still with the same determined gaze she remembered. "Margaret," he stood up immediately upon seeing her. "My God, how are you?" "Well, Attorney Stephen, better now that I'm free." Sit. Would you like coffee?" "Water." "A coffee would be great, thank you." While he prepared the coffee, Margaret observed the office. There were more books now, more diplomas on the wall. Attorney Stephen had prospered in the years she had been absent. "Margaret, I need to tell you something," he said, handing her a cup. "I never stopped thinking about your case. I always thought there was something wrong there." "You thought so?" "Yes. Several inconsistencies in the documents, witnesses who changed their stories, evidence that appeared at the last minute. But at the time I was very young, inexperienced. I couldn't articulate a proper defense." Margaret felt a wave of relief. It wasn't her paranoia. There really was something wrong with her case. "Attorney Stephen, I've discovered some things that might be important. Could you help me investigate?" "Of course. Tell me everything." Margaret spent the next hour recounting her discoveries, the visits from Richard that were intercepted, the deposits that disappeared from the account, Brandon Mitchell's sudden disappearance after the trial, the purchase of the farm in Arkansas. Attorney Stephen listened attentively, taking notes. "Margaret, this might be enough to request a review of your case, if we can prove there was evidence tampering or concealment of information." "You really think so?" "I do. But it will be a long and complicated process, and it won't be cheap." Margaret sighed. She had no money. She had left prison with the little she had managed to save from her prison jobs. It wasn't enough to fund an investigation. How much would it be? For a full investigation? At least $20,000. Would have to hire a private investigator, request official documents, maybe travel to Arkansas. $20,000. An impossible sum for someone in her situation. "I don't have that money, Attorney Stephen." "I know, but let me think of an alternative. Perhaps we can work on a contingency basis. If we get compensation from the state for the wrongful imprisonment, then you pay me." "You would do that?" "I would. That case has bothered me for 27 years, Margaret. I really want to see justice done." For the first time since leaving prison, Margaret felt genuinely hopeful. She had a lawyer, she had leads to follow, she had a real chance to clear her name. "Where do we start?" "First, we'll request all the documents from your original trial. Then we'll request the bank statements from your account for the last 30 years, and in parallel, I'll hire an investigator to locate Brandon Mitchell. How long could this take? A few months, maybe a year. It depends on what we find along the way. Margaret nodded. After 27 years of waiting, she could wait a little longer. The important thing was that there was finally a light at the end of the tunnel. Attorney Stephen, there's one more thing. My family, they don't know I'm investigating this. My daughter still believes I'm guilty. I don't want to create false hope if it comes to nothing. I understand perfectly. We'll keep everything discreet until we have something concrete. When Margaret arrived home that afternoon, she found Christopher fixing a leak in the kitchen. He was lying under the sink, trying to tighten a pipe with an old wrench. Need any help? She offered. I think I've got it, he replied, clearly straining. This pipe is always giving us trouble. Why don't you call a plumber? Christopher crawled out from under the sink and looked at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. A plumber? Grandma, do you know how much a plumber costs? I work 3 jobs and we can barely pay the basic bills. Margaret felt foolish for asking. Of course, they didn't have money to hire professionals. The whole family's financial situation was a consequence of her imprisonment. Let me try, she said, taking the wrench from his hands. You know about plumbing? In prison, you learn a bit of everything. When something breaks, there's no one to call. Margaret lay down under the sink and examined the leak. It was a simple problem with the pipe fitting. In a few minutes, she had fixed it. How did you do that? Christopher asked, impressed. Experience, she smiled. In prison, if you don't learn to manage, you go without. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course. What was it like? Prison. Margaret hesitated. It was the first time anyone in the family had asked about her prison experience. She wasn't quite sure how to answer. It was hard, but I tried to use the time as best I could. I studied, learned new things, tried to prepare for when I got out. Did you have friends there? A few. Most of the women inside are just trying to survive, like I was. We help each other when we can. Christopher nodded thoughtfully. Grandma, can I tell you something? Of course, my dear. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and think about what it would be like if Grandpa were still alive, if you had never left. How different our lives would be. Margaret felt her heart tighten. Her grandson's words echoed her own nightly thoughts for the past 27 years. I think about that every day, Christopher. Do you miss him a lot? I miss him with a physical ache. Your grandfather was. He was my best friend. Losing him without even getting to say goodbye is a pain that doesn't go away. Christopher was quiet for a moment. Grandma, did you really do those things they said? It was the question she had expected and feared. Margaret looked into her grandson's eyes, seeing the same honesty she had always seen in Richard. No, Christopher, I didn't. I would never knowingly harm our family. Then why were you convicted? Because someone framed me. Someone forged documents, bribed witnesses, built a case against me, but I couldn't prove it at the time. And now you can. Margaret hesitated. Should she tell him about her investigation? Maybe. I'm trying to figure some things out, but I don't want to get anyone's hopes up if it doesn't work out. Can I help? The offer surprised Margaret. Christopher was the first person in the family to believe in her enough to offer help. Yes, you can, my dear. Just having someone in the family believe in me is already a huge help. That night during dinner, Jennifer was quieter than usual. Christopher tried to start a conversation a few times, but she answered in monosyllables. Margaret sensed something was wrong. Did something happen today, dear? Jennifer looked up from her plate and stared at her. Yes, something happened. The whole town is talking about you being back, and they're not saying nice things. What are they saying? That you have a lot of nerve coming back here after stealing so much money. That you should be ashamed to show your face. A few clients cancelled orders with me because they don't want to be associated with the family of a criminal. Each word was a stab. Margaret knew her return would cause reactions in town, but she never imagined it would affect Jennifer's work. Honey, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to?" Jennifer laughed bitterly. "You've already hurt everything you possibly could in our family. Now you're hurting my work too." "Jennifer, please don't be unfair to your mother," Christopher intervened. "She just arrived. She's trying to readjust." "Unfair? Me? Unfair?" Jennifer stood up abruptly. "Christopher, your grandmother stole from our own company. She was tried and convicted. How can you defend her?" "Because maybe she's innocent," Christopher replied calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer looked at her son as if he had lost his mind. "Innocent? Christopher, have you gone crazy?" "No, Mom. I talked to Grandma today. She told me things that make sense. And you yourself always said Grandpa never believed she was guilty." "Your grandfather was a passionate man who refused to accept reality. Or maybe he knew something we don't," Christopher replied. Jennifer left the kitchen, slamming the door. Margaret and Christopher were left alone at the table, listening to her heavy footsteps going up the stairs. "She'll be okay," Christopher said softly. "It's just hard for her to question things she's believed for so many years." "I understand, my dear. It's hard for all of us." "Grandma, about this investigation you mentioned, when will it start?" Margaret smiled. Christopher was more mature than he seemed. Maybe it was time to trust him. "Actually, it's already started." She told her grandson about her conversation with Attorney Stephen, about the clues she had discovered, about the plan to find Brandon Mitchell. Christopher listened attentively, asking smart questions. "And if you get proof?" he asked when she finished. "Then I'll be able to clear my name officially, and maybe get compensation from the state for the wrongful imprisonment. How much money? I don't know. Attorney Stephen said it could be a lot, depending on what we can prove." Christopher was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "Grandma, can I help you with anything? I don't have much free time, but actually, there is one thing you can do. Do you know anyone who has a computer with internet? I need to research some things about Brandon Mitchell, but I don't know how to use these modern technologies. I have an old computer in my room. It's nothing special, but it works. I can teach you how to use it." "You would do that?" "Of course. We're family, right?" For the first time since she had arrived, Margaret felt truly accepted by someone in the family. Christopher not only believed her, but was willing to help her. It was a start. Later that night, Christopher showed Margaret how to use the computer. It was old equipment, slow, but it worked. He taught her how to navigate the internet, do searches, find information. "Look, Grandma, if you type Brandon's name here, maybe something about him will come up." They spent an hour searching but didn't find much information. There were only a few old references about him from when he worked in the region. "Tomorrow, I can try other ways to search," Christopher said as they were getting ready for bed. "I have a friend who knows more about computers than I do." "Thank you, my dear, for everything. You're welcome, and Grandma. I believe you. I don't know why, but I believe you." Margaret hugged her grandson, feeling tears in her eyes. It was the first family hug she had received in 27 years. The next morning, Margaret woke to the sound of raised voices coming from the kitchen. It was Jennifer and Christopher arguing. "You can't be serious, Christopher." "I am, Mom. She deserves a chance." "A chance? She already had her chance and wasted it. Now you want us to believe some fanciful story about a conspiracy?" "It's not made up. There's evidence." "What evidence? The hunches of an ex-convict?" Margaret dressed quickly and went down to the kitchen. Christopher and Jennifer were face to face, clearly in the middle of a serious argument. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning, Grandma," Christopher replied. "Mom found out about our conversation yesterday." Margaret looked at Jennifer, seeing the anger and disappointment in her eyes. "Honey, I can explain." "Explain what? That you're filling my son's head with conspiracy theories? That you're trying to destroy the peace we managed to build after so much suffering? I'm not trying to destroy anything, I just want to clear my name." "Clear your name?" Jennifer laughed in that bitter way Margaret was beginning to hate. "Mom, you were judged by a jury. There was an investigation, there was evidence. How can you still insist you're innocent?" "Because I am innocent," Margaret exploded. "And if you stop judging me for 2 minutes and actually listen to what I have to say, you might discover some truths that could shock you. What truths? The truth about the visits your father made to me that were intercepted. The truth about the money he deposited into my account that someone stole. The truth about the accountant who disappeared right after the trial with enough money to buy a farm. Jennifer fell silent, processing the information. What visits are you talking about? Your father visited me every Sunday in prison, for 17 years until he died. But someone made sure those visits were refused in my name so he would think I didn't want to see him. That doesn't make sense. Yes, it does. And there's more. He deposited $200 a month into my account so I could buy things at the commissary. But that money was withdrawn immediately by someone else. I never saw a cent of that money. Jennifer sat down heavily in a chair. Who told you these things? Mrs. Dorothy told me about the visits and the deposits. Mr. Harold from the bank confirmed there was activity in the account. And Mrs. Patricia from the records office told me about the farm that Brandon bought right after my trial. Brandon Mitchell? Yes, the accountant who testified against me. Who said I coerced him into signing false documents? He disappeared from town right after I was convicted. Jennifer was clearly shaken by the information. Christopher approached his mother and put a hand on her shoulder. Mum, what if she's telling the truth? If she's telling the truth, Jennifer said slowly, that means I hated my mother for 27 years for no reason. That means my father died knowing she was innocent, and I never believed him. The weight of that possibility was visible on Jennifer's face. Margaret carefully approached her daughter. Honey, I'm not asking you to believe me blindly. I'm just asking you to give me a chance to investigate. If I'm wrong, if I really am guilty, you never have to see me again in your life, but if I'm right, if you're right, I'll never forgive myself for doubting you. Jennifer finished the sentence with tears in her eyes. You don't have to forgive yourself for anything, honey. You were young, you were scared, you had to protect your family. You did the best you could with the information you had. Christopher watched his mother and grandmother, feeling he was witnessing a historic moment for the family. So what are we going to do? He asked. Jennifer took a deep breath before answering. We'll investigate, but I want to be involved in everything. I want to see all the evidence, talk to all the people, know every detail. Margaret felt a wave of relief. Finally, her family was willing to give her a chance. Attorney Stephen is coordinating the investigation. You can come with me to the next meeting with him. When is it? Tomorrow morning. Then we'll go together. That morning, Margaret and Jennifer walked together to Attorney Stephen's office. It was the first time in 27 years they had done anything together, and the tension was palpable. Mom, Jennifer said as they were arriving at the office, I want you to know that I'm still very hurt by everything that happened. Even if you are innocent, it was 27 lost years. That won't change overnight. I understand, daughter. I'm just grateful you're giving me a chance. Attorney Stephen was surprised to see Jennifer, but in a positive way. He explained the entire investigation strategy, showed the documents he had already requested, and talked about the private investigator he was hiring. And how long will this take? Jennifer asked. A few months, maybe a year. It depends on what we find and how people cooperate. And if you discover my mother is truly innocent, what happens? Then we file a request for criminal review. With luck, we can overturn the conviction and even sue the state for wrongful imprisonment. How much money could be involved? In compensation for 27 years of wrongful imprisonment, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe over $1 million. Jennifer looked at her mother with an expression that mixed hope and fear. And if you discover she is actually guilty, then at least you'll have certainty, and life goes on. When they left the office, Jennifer was quiet, processing everything she had heard. Daughter, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that if you really are innocent, I committed the greatest injustice of my life, and I'm thinking that if you are guilty, at least I'll have absolute certainty. And which of the two do you prefer? Jennifer stopped walking and looked directly at her mother. I prefer that you be innocent, Mom. Even with all the pain that will cause, I prefer that you be innocent. It was the first time in 27 years that Jennifer had called her Mom with affection. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face. Thank you, daughter. Don't thank me yet. Let's find out the truth first. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house changed significantly. There was still tension, but there was also hope. Christopher continued working his 3 jobs, but spent his evenings helping Margaret with internet research. Jennifer maintained some emotional distance, but was no longer hostile. A week later, Attorney Stephen called with news. "Margaret, we got some important information. My investigator located Brandon Mitchell. He really lives on a farm in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And now? Now we go there to talk to him. Can you travel next week?" Margaret hesitated. She didn't have money to travel, and still didn't feel comfortable asking the family for help. "Attorney Stephen, I don't have the resources to pay for a trip like that. Don't worry. I'll cover the costs now and settle with you later when we resolve everything." "Can Jennifer come along?" "Yes, she can. In fact, it would be even better. Even if Brandon confessed anything, it's important to have witnesses." When Margaret told Jennifer about the trip, her daughter hesitated. "Mom, I can't just leave the city like that. I have orders to deliver. I can't abandon my work." "I understand, daughter, but Christopher can go with you." "Christopher, but he can't miss work. He's entitled to vacation. He hasn't taken a single day off in 2 years. It's time for him to rest a little." Christopher was excited about the prospect of the trip. It was the first time he would leave his hometown for something that wasn't work. "Grandma, do you think this Brandon guy will tell the truth?" "I don't know, my dear, but at least we'll try to find out what he knows." The night before the trip, Jennifer sought out Margaret in her room. "Mom, can I talk to you?" "Of course, daughter. Sit here." Jennifer sat on the bed next to Margaret, hesitant. "I want to apologize to you." "Apologize for what?" "For not believing in you, for being so harsh, for letting my resentment speak louder than my love." Margaret took her daughter's hand. "Daughter, you have nothing to apologize for. You were just a girl when everything happened. It was natural that you'd be confused and hurt. But I should have visited you in prison at least once. I should have tried to understand your side of the story. You were protecting your family, your son. There's nothing wrong with that." Jennifer began to cry silently. "Mom, I held on to so much hate for so long, and if you really are innocent, all that hate was for nothing." "Hate is never for nothing if it protects you from more pain. You did what you needed to do to survive. How can you be so understanding after everything?" Margaret thought for a moment before answering, "Because in prison I had 27 years to think about it. And one thing I learned is that holding on to anger for others is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. The anger only hurts the one who feels it. You never felt angry at me. I did, many times, especially in the early years. But then I understood that you were also a victim of this whole situation." Mother and daughter fell silent for a moment, each lost in her own thoughts. "Mom, no matter what we find out on this trip, I want to try to rebuild our relationship. It might take time, it might be hard, but I want to try." "I want that too, daughter. More than anything in the world." The next morning, Margaret, Christopher, and Attorney Stephen left for Arkansas. The bus ride was long, but Margaret didn't mind. With every mile they put between themselves and the city, she felt she was getting closer to the truth. Christopher was excited about the trip, asking questions about Arkansas, watching the landscape through the window. For him, it was an adventure. For Margaret, it was possibly the most important chance of her life. "Grandma, are you nervous?" "Very, my dear." This might be our only chance to discover the truth. What if Brandon doesn't want to talk? Then we'll have to think of an alternative, but first, we'll try the direct approach." Attorney Stephen had called Brandon the day before, arranging a meeting under the pretext of discussing a matter related to the old company. Brandon had agreed to receive them at the ranch. Brandon's property was impressive, a ranch of hundreds of acres with a modern main house, well-structured corrals, and a lot of cattle. It was clearly a prosperous operation. "Wow," Christopher murmured as they got out of the taxi that had brought them from the bus station. "This place must cost a fortune." "That's exactly why we're here," Margaret replied. Brandon received them on the porch of the main house. He had aged well, was tanned by the country sun, and wore expensive rancher's clothes. When he saw Margaret, His expression changed completely. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" "Hi, Brandon, can we talk?" I don't know if that's a good idea." "Please," Attorney Stephen interjected. "It's just a few questions, it won't take long." Brandon hesitated, but finally invited them inside. The house was luxurious, tastefully decorated with all the modern amenities. "Nice ranch," Margaret commented, looking around. "It must have cost a lot of money." "I've been lucky with investments," Brandon replied, but he was visibly uncomfortable. "What kind of investments?" "Various things. The financial market, some opportunities that came up." Attorney Stephen decided to get straight to the point. "Brandon, we're here because we discovered some inconsistencies in Margaret's case, inconsistencies that might indicate she was the victim of a setup." "I don't know what you're talking about." "We know you bought this ranch right after Margaret's trial. We know you disappeared from town overnight. And we know someone was intercepting the visits and stealing the money her husband deposited." Brandon visibly paled. "You can't prove any of that." "Not yet," Margaret said calmly, "but we're investigating, and sooner or later we'll discover the truth. The truth is you were convicted of theft. The rest is imagination." "Brandon," Christopher spoke for the first time, "my grandfather died believing in my grandmother's innocence. He spent 17 years trying to visit her in prison, depositing money for her, never giving up. If he was right, that means you were part of a scheme that destroyed our family." "I wasn't part of any scheme, I just testified to what I saw." "And what did you see?" Margaret asked. "I saw you signing fake documents. I saw you embezzling money from the company." "Brandon, look at me," Margaret said, moving closer to him. "Look me in the eyes and tell me, did you really see me doing those things? Or did someone tell you they saw me doing those things?" Brandon averted his gaze. I saw—" "No, you didn't. You lied in court. Someone paid you to lie." "That's not true." "Then explain to me how a small-town accountant gets the money to buy a farm this size right after participating in a trial." The silence that followed was telling. Brandon was clearly panicking, sweating despite the air conditioning, avoiding looking at any of them. "Brandon," Attorney Stephen said softly, "if you were part of a conspiracy to frame Margaret, there's still time to tell the truth. Cooperation could mean a plea deal. And if I wasn't part of it, then you have nothing to fear from a full investigation." Brandon stood up abruptly. "I think you should leave." "Brandon, please," Margaret pleaded. "I lost 27 years of my life. My husband died alone. My daughter grew up hating me. My grandson grew up not knowing his family. If you know anything that could help clear the truth, please tell me." "I don't know anything." But his voice betrayed nervousness and guilt. Christopher watched the man intently. "Uncle," he said, using the informal address that made Brandon even more uncomfortable. "Do you have children?" I have a daughter. Imagine if your daughter were wrongly imprisoned for 27 years. Imagine if she lost her family, her dreams, her whole life because of a lie. Wouldn't you want whoever knew the truth to have the courage to speak up?" Brandon sat down heavily in an armchair, putting his hands over his face. "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen that way." "How was it supposed to happen?" Margaret asked gently. "It was just supposed to be a scare. To make you pay and end it all." "Brandon, what are you talking about?" The man looked up, and for the first time since they arrived, Margaret saw genuine remorse on his face. "I was being blackmailed." "Blackmailed? By whom?" "By a group of people who found out that I had some gambling problems. I owed a lot of money to dangerous people." Margaret felt her heart race. Finally, Brandon was starting to talk. "Go on." "They approached me and said they had a proposal. If I helped build a case against you and your husband, they'd pay off my debts and even give me money to start a new life." "What kind of case?" "Embezzlement. They had forged documents, fake signatures. They said it was just to pressure you into paying an amount, and then it would all be dropped." "But it wasn't dropped." "No. Things got out of control. The investigation went deeper than we expected, and when it went to court there was no turning back." Christopher was discreetly recording the conversation on his phone. Attorney Stephen was taking detailed notes. Brandon, who were these people who blackmailed you? I can't say. They told me if I spoke, they'd kill my family. Brandon, that was 27 years ago. Those people probably don't even exist anymore. But what if they do? I have a daughter, Margaret. I can't take that risk. Margaret moved closer to Brandon and sat down beside him. Brandon, I understand your fear, but look at me. Look what happened to me because of this lie. I lost everything, my family, my life, my dignity. You have a chance to help fix this. If I talk, can you protect me? We can try. Attorney Stephen can include witness protection in the agreement. Brandon was silent for long minutes, clearly wrestling with an internal battle. All right, he said finally. I'll tell everything. But I want written guarantees that I'll have protection. You'll have it, Attorney Stephen assured. And I want my testimony to be officially recorded with witnesses. I don't want you saying later that I didn't cooperate. Perfect, we can do that today at the Hot Springs police station. Brandon nodded, resigned. Then let's go. But after this, I'll have to leave this farm. I'll have to start all over again. Brandon, Margaret said softly, doing the right thing sometimes has a price, but living with a lie does too. I know. These 27 years haven't been easy for me either. Every night I thought about what I had done to you. Then let's fix it now. At the Hot Springs police station, Brandon gave a full statement, revealing details that left everyone shocked. The scheme was more elaborate than anyone had imagined. According to Brandon, a group of people connected to local politics had discovered that the company Turner and Associates was participating in important public works bids. They wanted the company eliminated from the competition to favor partner companies. The initial plan was to create a minor scandal that would force Richard to withdraw from the bids. But when the investigation took on a life of its own, they decided to see it through to the end, to definitively eliminate the competition. Brandon was coerced into falsifying documents and testifying against Margaret because she was responsible for the financial area of the company. The signatures were forged by an expert, the bank deposits were manipulated, and the witnesses were bribed or threatened. And the deposits my husband made into my account? Margaret asked. One of the people in the group had access to the bank's system. She intercepted your visitation requests and withdrew the money immediately after the deposits. Who was that person? Brandon hesitated again. It was Michelle Bennett. She worked at the bank at the time. Margaret remembered Michelle, a young woman, always friendly, who handled the company's accounts. She never imagined she could be involved in the conspiracy. Is she still in town? I don't know. After it was all over, she was transferred to another branch, in another state. The officer taking the statement was impressed by the complexity of the case. Mrs. Turner, with this testimony, you have a solid basis to request a criminal review. I will forward everything to the competent authorities in your state. How long could it take? A few months, but with evidence like this, the request will hardly be denied. When they left the police station, Christopher hugged his grandmother. Grandma, we did it. You're going to clear your name. It's not quite like that yet, my dear. Now the bureaucratic part begins. But at least we have hope. Attorney Stephen was excited. Margaret, this case could generate a multi-million-dollar settlement. Wrongful imprisonment for 27 years, with evidence of conspiracy. The state will have to pay dearly for this. The money isn't the most important thing, she replied. The most important thing is to clear my name and get my family back. And you've already gotten part of it back, Christopher said, pointing to himself. I'll always believe in you, Grandma. On the return trip, Margaret felt a mix of relief and anxiety. They had secured Brandon's confession, but there was still a long road ahead. And there was the matter of telling Jennifer everything. Grandma, how do you think my mom will react when she finds out everything? I don't know, my dear. It will be hard for her to accept that she spent 27 years hating her own mother for no reason. But she'll be happy too, right? To know that you're innocent? I hope so. But sometimes the truth hurts more than the lie because the truth forces us to question everything we believed in. When they arrived home, it was already night. Jennifer was waiting in the living room, clearly anxious for news. So, how did it go? Margaret sat down beside her daughter and held her hands. Sweetheart, we have a lot to talk about. She told her everything. Brandon's confession, the details of the conspiracy, the involvement of Michelle from the bank, the official testimony. Jennifer listened in silence, her expressions shifting between shock, anger, and sadness. "So you really are innocent," she said when Margaret finished. "Yes, I am, sweetheart." Jennifer broke down in tears. My God, what have I done? How could I doubt you for so long?" "Sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong." "Yes, I did. I abandoned you when you needed me most. I believed the lies. I left you alone in prison for 27 years. Margaret hugged her daughter, letting her cry freely. "Sweetheart, listen to what I'm going to tell you. You were an 18-year-old girl when all this happened. You were scared, confused, trying to protect your life and later your son's life. You did the best you could with the information you had. But Dad always believed in you. He always said there was something wrong with the story. Your father knew me longer. He knew I would never harm our family. And I should have known too. I'm your daughter." "You are my daughter, and I love you unconditionally. It doesn't matter how many years you doubted me. It doesn't matter what harsh words you said. You are still my daughter, and I still love you." Christopher watched his mother and grandmother reconciling, with tears in his own eyes. It was the ending he had always dreamed of but never dared to hope for. "Mom, Grandma," he said, "you know this means we're a real family now, right?" Margaret and Jennifer laughed through their tears. "Yes, we are, my dear," Margaret answered. "We are finally a real family." In the months that followed, the Turner family's life changed completely. The request for a criminal review was accepted, and with the evidence presented, Margaret's conviction was officially overturned. She was declared innocent of all charges. The resulting investigation led to the discovery of a corruption network that had operated in the region for decades. Several people were arrested, including local politicians and public officials. Michelle Bennett was located and also confessed her involvement. The compensation Margaret received from the state was substantial, more than $1.5 million. With that money, she paid off all the family's debts, completely renovated the house, established an education fund for Christopher, and even opened a small legal aid consulting office. Christopher was able to cut back to one job and return to studying, pursuing a law degree at a nearby university. He said he wanted to help other people who went through situations similar to his grandmother's. Jennifer expanded her sewing studio, hired employees, and became a respected businesswoman in the city. But most importantly, she and Margaret completely rebuilt their relationship. "Mum," Jennifer said one morning as they had coffee together in the rebuilt garden, "do you forgive me for all those years of hatred?" "Sweetheart, there is nothing to forgive. You were a victim of the same injustice I was. The difference is I knew I was innocent, you didn't know. Still, I should have visited you at least once, and I should have insisted more to prove my innocence back then. But look where we ended up. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations." Margaret became a respected figure in the community, known for helping people with legal troubles and for her story of perseverance. She gave talks about justice and forgiveness, always emphasizing that it's never too late to start over. Christopher graduated from law school with honors and opened a practice in partnership with his grandmother. They specialized in cases of injustice and wrongful conviction reversals. "Grandma," he said on graduation day, "thank you for never giving up on proving your innocence. You taught me that the truth always finds a way. And you taught me, my dear, that family is who believes in you even when the whole world doubts." Jennifer married again, this time to a man who respected and admired her strength. Margaret was radiant seeing her daughter happy and fulfilled. "Mom," Jennifer said on the wedding day, "I want you to know that he, even though not physically here, would be proud to see our family reunited and happy. He is here, dear. In every moment of love we share, your father is here." The Turner family home became the most beautiful on the street again. The garden flourished, the walls were repainted, the roof was fixed. But most importantly, it became a home full of love, laughter, and unity once more. Mrs. Dorothy, the neighbor who had revealed the first important secrets, became a great friend of Margaret's. They spent whole afternoons talking in the garden, reminiscing about old times and planning the future. "Margaret," Mrs. Dorothy said one day, "did you know your story inspired many people in town? How so? Several people who had given up fighting for justice changed their minds after seeing your victory. You proved it's never too late to seek the truth. Margaret smiled, looking at the house where she now lived happily with her reunited family. You know what I've learned all these years, Mrs. Dorothy? What? That time can heal any wound, if you have enough patience and love. And that family isn't those who never disappoint you. Family is those willing to acknowledge mistakes and start over. And forgiveness isn't forgetting what happened. It's choosing to build something better despite what happened. During the afternoons, Margaret often sat in the same spot on the porch where Jennifer had received her coldly years before. Now it was common for Jennifer and Christopher to join her, and the three would talk about everything: work, dreams, good and bad memories. "Grandma," Christopher asked one of those afternoons, "do you regret anything?" Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I regret not fighting harder back then to prove my innocence, but I don't regret the path we walked. All those difficult years made us stronger, more compassionate, more united people." "And do you feel anger toward the people who framed you?" "I did for a long time. But anger is a poison we drink hoping the other person dies. I chose to forgive not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace." "And what would you say to someone going through a similar injustice?" "Never give up on the truth. The truth may take time to appear. It may be painful when it does, but it always appears. And that true family is the one that stands by your side when the storm passes." One Sunday afternoon, exactly 3 years after her return, Margaret was watering the rose bushes she had replanted in the garden when she heard the gate open. It was Christopher, coming with a young and pretty woman. "Grandma, Mom," he called, "I want you to meet someone very special." The woman was Emily, an education student Christopher had met at university. She was kind, polite, and clearly in love with Christopher. "Emily," Margaret said, embracing her future granddaughter-in-law, "welcome to our family." "Thank you, Mrs. Turner. Christopher told me your whole story. It's an honor to meet you." "The honor is ours, dear." During dinner, Emily asked many questions about the family's history, showing genuine interest and admiration. "Mrs. Turner," she said, "have you ever thought about writing a book about your experience?" "I have thought about it. Maybe one day. It would be good if other people could learn from our story." "I think you really should write it," Jennifer said. "Your story could help other families going through similar situations, and it could help people understand the importance of forgiveness and family unity," Christopher added. Margaret smiled, looking around the table where her family was gathered, happy and united. "Perhaps you're right. Maybe it is time to share our story with the world." A few months later, Margaret began writing her memoirs. The process was therapeutic, allowing her to revisit all the difficult moments with the perspective of final victory. The book, It's Never Too Late to Start Over, a story of injustice, forgiveness, and reconciliation, became a national success. Margaret used the royalties to establish a foundation that helped families of people wrongfully imprisoned. "Mom," Jennifer said at the book launch, "I am so proud to be your daughter. And I am proud of the strong, courageous woman you have become, my daughter." Christopher married Emily in a beautiful ceremony in the family's garden. Margaret was the matron of honor, fulfilled to be present at such an important moment in her grandson's life. "Grandma," Christopher said during the reception, "thank you for never giving up on us. If you hadn't come back, if you hadn't proven your innocence, none of this would be possible. My dear true family never gives up. It may take time, it may be difficult, but it never gives up." Emily fit perfectly into the Turner family. She admired Margaret's story of perseverance and became an active advocate for the rights of the wrongfully imprisoned. When Emily became pregnant, Margaret cried with joy. She would be a great-grandmother, a title she never imagined she would achieve. "Grandma Margaret," Emily said, using the affectionate nickname she had created. "This baby will grow up knowing your family's story. They will know about courage, forgiveness, and unity. And they will grow up surrounded by so much love," Margaret replied, stroking Emily's belly. The birth of Richard Turner, a name chosen in honor of his great-grandfather, was one of the happiest days of Margaret's life. Holding her great-grandson in her arms, She felt the cycle had finally been completed. "Welcome to the Turner family, my dear," she whispered to the baby. "You were born into a family that has weathered many storms, but always finds its way back together in the end." Jennifer watched her mother with her grandson, tears of happiness in her eyes. "Mom, did you know that when Dad died, he said his greatest wish was to see our family reunited again?" "Yes, I knew, daughter. And look what we've accomplished. Not only did we reunite, but we grew. We multiplied. Dad would be happy, wouldn't he? He would be overjoyed, daughter, overjoyed." On a quiet afternoon, 5 years after her return, Margaret was sitting in the garden watching Christopher play with little Richard, while Emily and Jennifer prepared Sunday lunch. The scene was perfect. 3 generations of the Turner family united, happy, building positive memories. Mrs. Dorothy approached the gate, as she regularly did. "Margaret, can I tell you something?" "Of course, my friend." "Did you know your story changed this entire town?" "How so?" "People learned not to judge so quickly. They learned about the importance of forgiveness. Several families that were feuding reconciled after seeing you all." Margaret smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction. "You know, Mrs. Dorothy, I spent 27 years thinking my life had been wasted, but now I understand it wasn't wasted. It was preparation." "Preparation for what?" "To be the person my family needed me to be, to have the wisdom necessary to forgive, to have the patience necessary to rebuild broken bonds, and to inspire other people." "That too." Christopher approached with his son in his arms. "Grandma, what are you talking about?" "About how life is surprising, my dear. Sometimes the greatest challenges lead to the greatest victories. And about how family is everything," Mrs. Dorothy added. "That's right," Margaret agreed, taking her great-grandson into her arms. "Family is everything." That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Margaret stayed alone in the living room, looking at the photos that now decorated the walls. There were old photos from when Jennifer was a child and Richard was still alive. And there were new photos, Christopher's graduation, his wedding to Emily, the birth of little Richard. She picked up an old photo where she was with Richard and a young Jennifer at a birthday party. "My love," she whispered, as if Richard could hear her. "We did it. Our family is united again. Jennifer is happy, Christopher is grown and married, and we even have a great-grandson. You would be so proud." A gentle breeze moved the curtains, and Margaret smiled, interpreting it as a response. "I know you always believed in me. Thank you for never giving up, even when I was far away. Your love kept me strong through all those difficult years." She put the photo away and went up to her room. Through the window she could see the moonlit garden, the rose bushes that had bloomed again, the house that had become a home once more. At 72 years old, Margaret Turner had achieved something many people never do: complete reconciliation with her family, the clearing of her name, and the transformation of a tragedy into a story of hope. More important than anything, she had learned that true love always finds a way back home. On a sunny Sunday morning, exactly 7 years after her return, Margaret woke to the sound of happy voices coming from the garden. It was Christopher teaching little Richard, now 2 years old, to water the rose bushes. "Careful, son. Plants need tenderness, just like people," she heard Christopher say. "Like Grandma Margaret?" the boy asked in his sweet voice. "Like Grandma Margaret. She took care of all of us with great tenderness." Margaret smiled, put on her robe, and went down to join the family. Jennifer was making coffee in the kitchen, Emily was setting the breakfast table, Christopher was in the garden with his son, and everything seemed perfect. "Good morning, family," she said, hugging each one. "Good morning, Mother," Jennifer replied. "Did you sleep well?" "I slept wonderfully well. You know why?" "Why?" "Because when you have the family you love by your side, all dreams are sweet." Little Richard ran to her with open arms. "Grandma Margaret, Grandma Margaret." She picked him up, feeling her heart fill with joy. That child was proof that the Turner family had not only survived the storms but had flourished. "My love," she said to her great-grandson, "did you know you are a very special gift to our family?" "Why?" "Because you were born into a family that learned that love always wins, that forgiveness heals any wound, and that it's never, never too late to start over. The boy didn't fully understand the words, but he smiled and kissed his great-grandmother's cheek. During breakfast, the family talked about plans for the day, for the week, for the future. Dreams were being shared, memories were being recalled, love was being expressed. "Everyone," Margaret said when they finished eating, "I want you to know something." "What is it, Grandma?" Christopher asked. "These last 7 years since I returned home have been the happiest of my life. Happier than before I went to prison, because now I cherish every moment, every conversation, every hug." "We also learned to cherish, Mom," Jennifer said. "After almost losing you forever, we learned that family is the most precious thing we have, and that the truth always prevails," Emily added, "no matter how long it takes, no matter how painful it is to discover it. And that we should never give up on the people we love," Christopher completed. Margaret looked around the table, seeing the faces of the people she loved most in the world. Her daughter, strong and resilient. Her grandson, honest and determined. Her daughter-in-law, caring and wise. Her great-grandson, pure and full of life. "Do you know what makes me happiest?" "What?" they asked almost in unison. "It's knowing that our story doesn't end with me. Little Richard will grow up knowing he belongs to a family that went through trials but never lost love. And he will pass that on to his children. And so our story of forgiveness and reconciliation will continue for generations." "That's beautiful, Mom," Jennifer said with tears in her eyes. "And true," Christopher added. After coffee, the family spread out through the house. Christopher read the newspaper in the living room. Emily organized her baby things. Jennifer sewed in the studio, and Margaret stayed in the garden with little Richard, teaching him about the plants. "Grandma Margaret, why are flowers pretty?" "Because they grow with love, my dear, just like families. When there is love, everything becomes more beautiful. I love the family, and the family loves you, forever and ever." When the sun began to set, the whole family gathered on the porch, as it had become a tradition on Sundays. It was the time to reflect on the week that had passed and dream about the one to come. "Grandma," little Richard said, sitting on Margaret's lap, "tell a story." "What story do you want to hear, my love?" "The story of our family." Margaret smiled. At 2 years old, Richard already knew he belonged to a special family. "Once upon a time," she began, "a family that got lost but never stopped looking for each other, and when they finally found each other, they discovered that love had grown even stronger during the time they were apart." "And did they live happily ever after?" "They lived happily ever after," Margaret confirmed, kissing her great-grandson's forehead. "Just like us. Just like us." Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. The sun had set completely, and the Turner family remained gathered on the porch, talking, laughing, planning. The house, which had once been a symbol of abandonment and sadness, now radiated warmth and happiness. Margaret watched each face illuminated by the soft porch light and felt a deep gratitude. She had lost 27 years of her life to an injustice, but she had gained something even more valuable, the certainty that family love can overcome any obstacle. "Daughter," she said to Jennifer, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, Mum." "Have you completely forgiven me?" Jennifer took her mother's hand and squeezed it affectionately. "Mum, there is nothing to forgive. I am the one who needs your forgiveness for all those years of doubt." "You have it, daughter. You always have." "And I," Christopher interjected, "want to thank you for coming back home and teaching us about perseverance." "And I want to thank you for welcoming me into this wonderful family," Emily added. Little Richard, sleepy on his great-grandmother's lap, murmured, "I love everybody." "And everybody loves you too, my dear," Margaret replied. As the night went on, each family member went to their rooms. Emily took Richard to sleep. Christopher got things ready for work the next day. Jennifer finished up some sewing details. Margaret stayed last on the porch, as she always did. It was her moment of reflection, of gratitude, of connection with the memories of Richard. "My love," she whispered into the night, "another day with the family together, another day of shared love. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Thank you for giving me such a special family." A shooting star crossed the sky and Margaret smiled. "I'll take that as your goodnight kiss." In her room before sleeping, Margaret said her prayers of gratitude, as she did every night. She gave thanks for the family, for health, for the restored house, for the truth revealed, for the opportunities to help other people. "Thank you," she murmured, "for teaching me that it's never too late to start over, that love always finds a way back, and that a true family is one that grows stronger after the storms." She fell asleep to the soft sound of Christopher and Emily's voices, talking in the next room about plans for little Richard's future. It was the sweetest music she could hear, the sound of a happy family united, building dreams together. The next morning, Margaret woke up early, as was her custom. She went down to the kitchen and found a message from Jennifer on the refrigerator. "Mum, thank you for existing. I love you." She smiled, tucked the note into her heart, and began to prepare coffee for the whole family. It was Monday, a new beginning, a new opportunity to love and be loved. When the others came down for breakfast, they found the table set with care, fresh flowers from the garden in the center, and Margaret humming softly an old song she used to sing to Jennifer when she was a child. "Good morning, blessed family," she said, hugging each one. "Good morning, Grandma Margaret," little Richard replied, running into her arms. And so began another day in the life of the Turner family. An ordinary day, but extraordinary because it was lived with love, gratitude, and unity. Margaret had learned that true wealth is not in money, fame, or public recognition. True wealth is at the breakfast table surrounded by the people you love. It's in spontaneous hugs, in sincere conversations, in shared smiles. It's in the certainty that, no matter how many storms life brings, there is always a safe harbor called family waiting for you. And as she watched Christopher get ready for another day of work, Emily lovingly caring for their son, Jennifer organizing her sewing orders, and little Richard playing happily, Margaret Turner knew she had won the greatest prize possible, a family united by true love. "My God," she murmured, looking out the kitchen window at the flower garden. "Thank you for letting me come home. And thank you for teaching me that home isn't a place. Home is where your family is." The garden, bathed in the golden morning light, seemed to agree with her. The rose bushes swayed gently in the breeze, as if celebrating another day of the Turner family together. And so, after 27 years of separation, 3 years of reconciliation, and 7 years of shared happiness, the story of the Turner family continued to be written. No longer with tears of pain, but with smiles of joy. No longer with words of anger, but with declarations of love. No longer with the weight of injustice, but with the lightness of forgiveness. And with each new day, each new memory created, each new moment of togetherness, it became clearer that some stories have no end. They simply transform, renew, multiply. Margaret Turner's story had become the story of the Turner family, and the story of the Turner family had become an eternal lesson about the transformative power of love, perseverance, and forgiveness. A lesson that would be passed down from generation to generation, like a treasure more valuable than any material wealth. A lesson that said, it's never too late to come home. It's never too late to ask for forgiveness. It's never too late to start over. And most importantly, it's never too late to love. End of story. Now tell us what you thought about Margaret's story and her family. Do you think she made the right decisions by never giving up on proving her innocence? Do you believe forgiveness can truly heal such deep wounds? Leave your opinion in the comments and share if you know similar stories of family resilience. Don't forget to leave a like if the story moved you, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.